What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent and welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, the channel where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of the week yet again, the time where we sit back and reflect by rewinding and unpacking the round of football that just went down. We are directing our attention to round 20 in another edition of the Round Recap podcast. If you have missed any of these previous podcasts, plain and simple, really, by premise, even by name, we're going to have a look at the round that was before the round that will be is upon us. And round 20 was another action-packed round that presented a lot of opportunity for the titles Pretender and Contender to be thrown around. And I feel that is going to be the theme of today's video podcast, very much so, because you could clearly divide the competition into either kind of category of contender or pretender in the way of kind of disincluding some teams, I suppose, that aren't in the mix, but there still are a lot of teams that definitely are, and we're starting to find out which of those teams are willing to remain in the frying pan, for lack of a better word, for longer periods of time, you know, that can withstand the heat. And some teams are getting found out. Some teams aren't living up to that expectation. They're falling from grace in many ways, shapes, and forms. And while the competition is still very much open, we've got 4 rounds of football left before the end of the season, and the competition is still wide open for a number of teams. It is ridiculous to think we have had a year this year that has been marred by indecisions by umpiring and, you know, a terrible lack of adjudication. The off-field antics that we have seen, including that the new AFL CEO and Andrew Dillon, you know, thinks that the umpiring fraternity is as good as it has been and the state of the game is as good as it has been. We've recently had some headlines about players being in hospital and, you know, potential drug use being linked to that just this weekend gone. Clubs have been dragged through the mud for numerous reasons this year through the media. You know, it's been a very, very ugly year. In a year when you have a look at the ladder and the teams that have been performing, it could very well be and could have been one of the best years of football we have seen, especially given that finals is open to so many teams, with an 18-team competition, with a 19th team due to join in the way of the Tasmanian Devils in a couple of years' time, and then further expansion probably after that fact to places like Darwin. To have 10, 11 teams still actively competing for a top 8 spot is great. It's great for the game. It'd be a lot better if the game was being fucking treated the way it should be treated, both on and off the field, which poses a question, I suppose, from myself to you guys at home. Do you feel moving forward within a final structure that the wildcard round should be a thing? Should we include the 9th and 10th placed teams on the ladder at the end of the season to play finals against 7th and 8th spot to determine who truly does move on as that final 8? Quite personally, I think it's a great idea, because it doesn't only give us an extra week of football, it also opens up the competition to a couple more teams, which would keep more supporters interested in the long term, but it also gives that week break to the top 6 teams, essentially, instead of every team having a clean slate, you know, missing a week of football. We can work around a fixture that involves that wild card round. I'm just keen to know what you think at home. Moving away from that, focusing our attention on the action from round 20, the first kind of instance of that pretender versus contender scenario that I've been talking about came at Marvel Stadium on Friday night, with Carlton hosting Port Adelaide. I thought this was going to be a game where Carlton would win convincingly, and I say that given the momentum we have seen Carlton roll on with throughout the 2024 season versus the inconsistency that Port Adelaide has put up. And that inconsistency has even bled into home games at Adelaide Oval, which is something we are not used to seeing. And this is a game that really turned on its head after half-time in a game that, quite frankly, should have been completely dead in the water at half-time. Both of these teams leading a very tight contest into the first break, with Carlton 1 goal 4-10, just trailing behind Port Adelaide with 2 goals 2-14. The transition to half-time almost had me convinced the game was dead in the water. Carlton moved on to 8 goals 6-54, and Port Adelaide trailed with 4 goals 5-29, and I thought, this is it. This is Port Adelaide done. This is where Carlton are going to put the foot down. They're going to win by 10 plus goals. We have seen it happen so many times before this year with Carlton. There is no way they fumble this. 3/4 time, they go from 8 goals 6 to 9 goals 8, which opens the door for Port Adelaide to move from 4 goals 5 to 7 goals 10. Both teams incredibly inaccurate, but Port Adelaide could have stemmed the flow just in that third quarter alone had they had been more accurate in front of goal. They then moved on in a brilliant final term, with Carlton finishing 9 goals 11-65 against Port Adelaide's 11-13-79. Looking at the tail of the tape here and breaking down the timeline of the game, after a dominant first half display, Carlton went to sleep because you have a look, they kicked 8 goals 6 up until half time. For the rest of the game, they managed to kick 1 goal 5, where Port Adelaide transitioned from 4 goals 5 to 11 goals 13. This could have been an absolute blowout by Port Adelaide, which would have helped them, substantially when it comes to percentage. And I feel there are going to be teams this year missing the top 8 because of percentage. But the drop-off from Carlton, probably over the last month, I don't know where it's come from. And it's easy to point fingers this week because with the announcement of Tom de Koning going down with injury, there are a lot of Carlton supporters taking to social media and quite literally putting a strike through their own seasons. They think that without Tom de Koning, they're going to fail to make the top 8. They're not going to play finals. And when you look at the performance of Mark Pitnet this week versus the Tom de Koning, the absence of that kid is so glaring. It is so plainly obvious, like the nose on Pitnet's face, for lack of better terminology. They lose the grunt work around the contest. They lose a ruckman who has the ability to, get his own clearance, lay tackles, hit the scoreboard. Mark Pitnet is serviceable, but he is not on the level of TDK. And you compact that with some other injuries that they've got and some other players that have kind of dropped off, and you're looking at the usual suspects in requiring Cripps and Walsh to consistently carry this team. And unfortunately, it's not happening for them. It's not good enough. Harry Mackay was a late out due to illness, ironically, given that he was put into concussion protocols the week before. So very interesting to see that he copped a head knock and he was suffering from concussion-like symptoms. I don't think he officially entered concussion protocols, which would have seen him miss a week, but he was a late out due to illness. And I know Carlton are now being investigated for that illness, and I think that they're going to fuck around and they're going to find out. They can't pull the wool over the sheep's eyes. Port Adelaide, though, pick up a very handy win and remain in the hunt. This loss for Carlton very much means that they are potentially at risk of missing the 8 completely. That is still how wide open the competition is at. And to think they have played an incredibly dominant game of football when on top, the prospect of them missing the finals completely is absolutely huge. And we'll get into some ramifications of other games because there are some other teams that are falling further from grace that are almost out of contention completely, which is mind-blowing considering some of the teams we're going to be talking about. But a huge win for Port Adelaide. Carlton in a form slump, which could very much cost them a finals berth in 2024. I can't believe we're saying that, but that's how it went down. As far as the match report itself goes, with injuries or reports or anything else, Carlton did suffer a shoulder injury to Cunningham, and as I mentioned, there was a late change with Harry Mackay being replaced for illness with Lewis Young. There was no injuries for Port Adelaide. There was no reports out of the game either. pretty clean and straightforward when you look at it. So we can move on quite happily to who I thought were the best players afield, which was hard to judge this week. And as I have done so throughout this video podcast series, when it comes to my voting for the best on ground, or for the sake of this podcast, for the Hip and Shoulders MVP award for the season, this week was a little bit harder to judge than most because it was a close contest, but there were some players that still racked up a lot of the ball that I felt had very little influence. I mean, Patrick Cripps had 25 disposals at 64% efficiency, 18 were contested, he had 8 clearances, 3 score involvements, and 5 tackles, but I feel wasn't amongst the best 3 on the field. Maybe the best 5, but I couldn't find an argument to push him into even for one vote this week, because as a neutral supporter for most of the weekend, I watch every single game of football. Apart from watching my boys Richmond every week, I always sit down, always take in every game. My love for AFL is something to behold, truly. And I always watch these games as objectively non-biased as possible. And I know I've been bullish on Patrick Cripps this year, but I feel his influence on this game was very minimal compared to what we have seen from him this season. The 3 that I did land on, I feel had their moments and took those moments quite well, and they might not have had the same numbers as a Patrick Cripps or a Sam Walsh or a Connor Rozee, but I feel the influence they had with ball in hand was very critical, especially for who I gave the 1 vote and the 3 vote to. Both of those players were even lauded by the Fox Footy commentary team on the night, saying that Port Adelaide's win was I wouldn't say handed to them, but these 2 players were very monumental in getting their team back into the game after half time, which is why I've given votes to them. So the 1 vote this week I'm handing to Travis Boak. 22 disposals at 72% disposal efficiency, 6 contested possessions for 509 metres gained. He had 4 clearances, 6 marks, 4 score involvements, only laid the 1 tackle, which is kind of odd for Travis Boak because he's very defensively sound, but whenever he had the ball in hand, he was incredibly clean with it. I mean, out of the 22 disposals, 17 of them were kicks, and those kicks were so pivotal in particular moments of the game, especially through rebound work from Port Adelaide's defensive 50 to forward half. Absolutely incredible game from Travis Boak. The 2 vote this week I gave to Charlie Curnow, and again, I've been bullish on Charlie Curnow, and I threw stats out last week. Some people still might not agree with those stats. A lot of the goals this guy has kicked this year have come from free kicks within the forward 50, but his influence on this game I thought was rather huge for Carlton, and given that he had to play a solo key forward role and had Alira manning him all night, and Alira had a huge amount of intercept possessions. Let's have a look. Actually, he had quite a few. He had 8 marks for the game, and most of those marks came from defensive 50 turnover. So Alira had his number, but Charlie Curnow, I felt, made most of the opportunity he was given. 19 possessions at 63% disposal efficiency. 10 of those were contested. He ran for 547 metres gained, 9 marks, 3 goals won, 8 score involvements, and 2 tackles. Best on ground for me, and I feel it's had a rather underrated season for Port Adelaide this year. We talk about Connor Rozee, Jason Horne-Francis, Zach Butters, but Ollie Wines has been really impressive in patches this year, and this was one of those games. 25 disposals at 68% disposal efficiency, 11 contested for 280 metres gained. He had 10 clearances, took 2 marks, 6 score involvements, and 10 tackles on the night. His defensive game, especially in and under around the contest, has been incredibly pivotal to when Port Adelaide get over the line, especially in close games like this. I still argue the year he won the Brownlow, he wasn't the best player that year, but he has at least gone on to back up that as a midfielder, he's one of the more defensively sound mids, and I have a huge appreciation for those types of players, and I thought he was best of field last Friday night. Saturday afternoon down at Blundstone Arena, we saw North Melbourne host Geelong in a game where I initially tipped Geelong and then flipped my tip 5 minutes before the game started, thinking North Melbourne were going to do some damage, and I regretted it as the scoreboard continued to tick over. But with that being said, this again was another performance where North Melbourne fall by 40 points, but continue to still find a way to impress and show glimpses. And Kane Cornes came out this week, and now I don't know what his problem is with kicking teams while they're down, because as a Richmond supporter, we've had to bear the brunt of his bullshit for years, none more so than this year especially. But to come out and say that North Melbourne supporters are too easily pleased when they're losing, you've got to take the small wins. You've got to appreciate the fact that they might not be getting the result done on the scoreboard, but they're still showing signs of improvement, and I think a supporter can be happy about that. Surely they could be happy about that. And this was a game very much so that even up until half time was still very much in the balance. Quarter time was 3 goals 1 playing 3 goals 4, 3-point deficit the way of North Melbourne. Geelong going in with a very narrow lead, and you thought that this was going to be hard fought. Half time might have seen a little bit of a gap put on. Geelong 6 goals 5 leading North Melbourne 4 goals 3. But we've seen North Melbourne come back late in games this year and put on solid second halves, so you couldn't rule them out at half time. At 3/4 time, maybe the blood was already in the water at that point. Geelong 11 goals 8 leading North Melbourne 7 goals 4. And then for the remainder of the game, Geelong go on to kick 5 goals 2 to finish 16-10. North Melbourne go on to kick 3 goals 2 to finish on 66. It was still a game, I felt, that in patches North Melbourne looked in control, they looked composed, they were very sharp with their ball movement. It was just that when opportunity came knocking, Geelong took advantage. There were some brain fade moments by North Melbourne that were costly, none probably more so than Aidan Corr refusing to take the ball over the line and having it slapped out of his hands and a goal kicked on him by Ollie Dempsey. But, as I said, still in very tight-knit moments, North Melbourne looks very impressive. And I think North Melbourne, although Geelong win this game, North Melbourne take a lot more out of it. Speaking of injuries and how this game played out, however, Gary Rowan going down with concussion, I think, is going to be huge for Geelong. I really rate Gary Rowan as a third tall option. Very much plays and bases his game on speed as well. Very accurate on goal, loves to take a mark. I don't know whether his absence is going to harm Geelong long term, but it'll be interesting to see how his omission kind of creates opportunity, I suppose, for Geelong, especially given that Shannon Neal played. You saw Oliver play up forward, Cameron playing up forward, Dempsey goes down and plays forward, so they've still got a solid forward mix. I don't think it's going to hurt them as much as it should, but it'll be interesting to see how they kind of transition moving forward. This game was easy to determine, I think, the 3-2-1, and controversially, I think the one vote could have gone to many players in this particular game, but when you watched this game, it was hard to go against the 3 that I've picked, and I think I've landed on the perfect order quite personally. Feel free to let me know in the comments down below if I ever get any of these wrong, because it poses discussion point for myself and you guys at home. You know, who you think best on ground was versus who I think, and we can have a talk about it. Let's do it. Promise me you do it? Okay, you'll do it. So, the one vote this week I gave to Tristan Xerri. 25 disposals at 72%, 14 contested, 250 metres gained, 54 hitouts, 3 clearances, 5 marks, only kicked the one behind, but had 8 score involvements and 8 tackles of his own. I think he was only trumped in the tackle position by 1, and I think that was Jack Bowes, who laid 9 for the day. Score involvements, he was, I think, equal second behind Harry Sheasel, who was an absolute monster. Clearances, he had a handful. He dominated in the ruck. He had 54 of his own. The next best was Mark Blixavs with 25. So it was a very compelling individual victory for him, and I love his tenacity around the contest. And speaking of ruckman, as I did before, with Tom de Koning, he's a ruckman that can get down and dirty. He loves a tackle, he loves a clearance, and I feel that these type of ruckmen are now kind of reconfiguring what it means to be a ruckman, but he was definitely within the best three on the ground for me on Saturday. The 2 vote I'm giving to Tom Stewart, easily Geelong's best on. 32 disposals at 68% disposal efficiency, 18 contested, 527 metres gained, 4 clearances, 9 marks, 4 score involvements, and 1 tackle. I still love his transition from defence to midfield, and as a bigger bodied kind of midfielder, with a player like Stewart that has one of the highest, if not the highest, footy IQs in the game, he's going to be an invaluable weapon when it comes to that midfield kind of movement, especially with teams that do choose to tag him. And I feel this game was the perfect example as to why he needs to be tagged, because he is so influential on the field, whether it is the midfield minutes he's getting, whether it's that defensive role he plays. He is so pivotal to Geelong's success. Best on ground for me, however, in a performance that I think trumps Tom Stewart's, was 100% Harry Sheasel. Has to be. 36 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency. 25 of those 36 were contested. 400 metres gained. 9 clearances, 3 marks, 1 goal, 14 score involvements, and 5 tackles. North Melbourne had 16 scores for the game, and Harry Sheasel was directly involved in 14 of those 16. That is huge. That goes to show how much of an impact this kid has had at this club in such a short period of time, because this game was very much so, let's get the ball in Harry Sheasel's hands and everything else will fall into place. And that is exactly how it played out. This kid is a genuine superstar, and I was having conversations with some mates during the week with talks about, Harley Reid and Nick Dacos being generational players and how brilliant they are. I think people seem to forget that Harry Sheasel exists, because I feel he is very much a generational talent as well. Future Brownlow medalist as well, I definitely feel Harry Sheasel's got a Brownlow in him. And it's performances like this that make you feel, especially if you're a North Melbourne fan, that the future of the club is in great hands. Up north at People's First Stadium, we had the Q clash go down between the Gold Coast and Brisbane in a game that saw the Gold Coast lose their first game of the 2024 season at People's First against Brisbane. And Brisbane were just hungrier and wanted more of it, especially after halftime. Up until halftime, it was a tight contest, and even though Brisbane went in with a 3-goal margin at that break, we know how Gold Coast have probably overperformed in some examples at People's First, so you could never rule them out at this ground with a 3-goal deficit. But Brisbane came out in the second half going from 8-7 to 13-15, Gold Coast only managing to move from 5-8 to 9-11, kicking 4-3 for a game when Brisbane have come out and they've managed to notch up, 5-8 themselves. It could have been, again, another game where Brisbane could have put them to the sword and ran away with a bigger win. Brisbane now move to 2nd overall on the ladder with Carlton's loss. I feel, as it stands right now, Brisbane should be the favourite for the premiership, and I think if they finish in 2nd place, they are almost guaranteed to walk into that grand final, because you finish 2nd, the first final you get is going to be a home final, so they're playing at the Gabba, and we know just how much they love to play at the Gabba. They win that, they get a home prelim, and they're going to play at the Gabba again, which is going to get them to walk into the MCG again. Gold Coast, on the other hand, this loss could have very well been the end of their season in a contest that as I pointed out, they were well and truly in up until half time. They were knees deep in it. 3 goals is nothing. We have seen Gold Coast turn it on just like that. But yet again, players at the Gold Coast fell into traps of underperforming, and Damien Hardwick can sook and bitch and moan all he wants, really, but they need to stop being so heavily reliant on players like Flanders and Noah Anderson to be the match winners for them each and every week. It's not going to happen that way. No injuries out of this game, no reports out of this game. It was pretty clean cut as it comes. This game was just to follow up that close contest against Sydney last week, and then Brisbane to go to people's first. Just a tiny bit of a drive for them. But to knock off the Gold Coast in a game where the Gold Coast is still in the hunt kind of throws the Gold Coast a little bit into that pretenders list, while Brisbane very much shape up to be in that contenders bracket. And as I just pointed out, I think they're very much at the top of that contenders bracket. My personal viewpoint at this point in time is it's probably their premiership to fumble right now. Best on this week, you could have thrown a couple of names in for that one spot, but even though they lost, Sam Flanders played a hell of a game and has been by far this year not only the most improved for the Gold Coast, but I feel their best player overall. I think there should still be very much conversation about this kid being in the All-Australian squad this year. I don't know whether he'll make it, but he should be top 40. If he doesn't get a nomination, I would be shocked. 33 disposals at 75% disposal efficiency, 16 contested, 444 metres gained, 7 clearances, 4 marks, 1 goal, 6 score involvements, and 3 tackles on the day. The 2 votes, even though he picked up the Marcus Ashcroft medal, I'm pretty sure it's Marcus Ashcroft, right? That they play the middle four for the Q Clash, I think. Anyway, he was judged best of field. I didn't think he was. I thought he was just edged out, but he still had a huge game. Dane Zorko, 32 disposals at 87% disposal efficiency. 5 of those were contested for 553 metres gained. 12 marks, 9 score involvements, 3 tackles. Huge game. But I personally thought Lachie Neale was best on ground. 35 disposals at 82% disposal efficiency. 13 of those were contested for 334 metres gained. 10 clearances, 7 marks, 1 goal, 6 score involvements, and 4 tackles. I still feel something deep within me that this year's Brownlow count is going to be a draw, and Lachie Neale is about to become a 3-time Brownlow medalist. There's just something deep about it. He had a very slow start, which is probably going to cost him the Brownlow. Players like Zorko, Dunkley, Hugh McCluggage, all probably pinching votes off him in some weeks, but there's just something about a tie involved with Lachie Neale this year that I'm really feeling deep down. I don't know what it is, but it's there. I can feel it. And if it goes down that way, you heard it here first. Don't you forget it. Speaking of the contenders and pretenders brackets, you can easily throw Essendon into the pretenders bracket after this game, because this was as comprehensive a loss as you will see. St Kilda, Essendon, Marvel Stadium, Saturday afternoon. It spelt doom for Essendon. Lose this and they fall out of touch of the top 8 and puts them at a real risk of missing finals after many people had them as a top 4 lock after their hot start. St Kilda really not expected to do anything here. They've had a huge drop-off, played finals last year, huge disappointment this year, been clinging to the top 4 like it's a bad habit, and this game came out. Again, no Max King, no fucking worries. Found a way to not only win, but yet to kick again another winnable score, another big score. They've been really putting my comments about struggling to kick winning scores against better teams to bed. And on the flip side of things, Essendon's edge has seemingly been lost, especially when you look at the timeline and how this game played out. Quarter time, 5 goals, 1 played, 2 goals, 3. Couldn't rule Essendon out because we've seen Essendon start slow, finish strong. At half time, to answer that fact, St Kilda did lead, but it was 7 goals, 2, playing 5 goals, 5. It was only the way of 9 points, and it was a contest that you really felt was a going to be a coin flip after that, and you could probably say, especially for this game, that the third quarter was going to determine whether it falls or swings in the way of your favour, especially given that that's known as the Premiership quarter. St Kilda came out in one of the most dominant defensive displays I have seen. They piled on 7 goals 2 for the quarter, Essendon only managing to scrap the 1 goal 2, and the pressure around the contest for Essendon was non-existent. They didn't win a hard ball get for the entire quarter, and this was a team that came out in the start of the season not scared to throw their bodies into contests, not scared to throw their weight around to bully players off the ball. They didn't want a sniff of it in this third quarter, and there were snippets that were taken out of the game where you could see Zach Merritt getting stuck into Andrew McGrath and vice versa. So players are now starting to get frustrated with lack of effort on the field. There was footage of an Essendon supporter standing up and throwing their scarf onto the ground in defeat. And you compact that footage with the footage that has been leaked of the Essendon supporters booing and jeering the Essendon players as they come off the field. Absolutely disgusting. And I know you're probably sitting there going, well, Trent, there was a period in time where Richmond supporters were spitting on their coach, and I haven't forgotten that. I'm not a fucking idiot. I think any act like that is fucking below a human being and is fucking disgusting. But this is a team that they were happy to support only a couple of weeks ago, but now that they've fallen off a little bit, they're fucking running him into the ground. And I think it's almost as bad as it is funny, really, at this point. And I don't know. I really don't know. The fall from Essendon has come kind of left field a little bit and has left a lot of people wondering whether they're going to make the finals at all, because currently they're out of the top 8, and I don't think they're going to get back in there. I think their run home might be a little bit harder for them to justify moving forward, and we will get into that when it comes to the tipping over the next few weeks. And as I said, St Kilda really had nothing to play for except for pride. And they stood tall in the moment. They were the much better team. And they showed that Ross Lyon's defensive kind of structures and presence really is a good structure when executed well. For this game, injury-wise, Jordan Ridley got subbed out with a corked hip, and it looks like he will now be missing up to the next 3 weeks. You might as well put a cork in him. Quite literally, he's done. If he's going to miss 3 and there's only 4 left, why would you risk him coming back that last week, especially if finals are still in the mix? You'd rather him be as fresh as humanly possible, but going to be a huge out, because I feel Jordan Ridley was sorely missed at the beginning of the year when he transitioned back in the week that they played Richmond in the Dreamtime at the Clash. I was thinking the Clash of the Bridge and the Q Clash, and I've taken Dreamtime and mixed it. Dreamtime at the G was a huge game for him to return to, and he's been in fine form since returning. But yeah, big blow for Essendon with no Ridley for the next 3 weeks. Best on ground, 3 St Kilda players, 2 of which have had their names featured quite heavily this season when I voted, but the player that I'm giving the 1 vote to had an absolutely incredible game. Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, this kid just popped up everywhere. 31 disposals, which was the most by any player on the field. He ran at 87%, which was one of the best overall disposal efficiencies. 4 of those were contested, but he had 620 metres gained, broken down into 23 kicks and 8 handballs. Had 7 marks on the day, kicked 1 goal, and had 6 score involvements. His use of the ball is so sublime to watch. And again, we talk about North Melbourne being in good hands with Harry Sheezel. St Kilda are very well placed with Wanganeen-Malira running off of that back half, being that transitional running ball carrying player. Absolutely sensational. The 2 vote, voted for the 2 vote, sensational as always, goes to the captain, Jack Steele. He had 21 disposals at 90%. 5 of those were contested for 308 metres gained, 4 clearances, 6 marks, 3 goals, 8 score involvements, and 5 tackles on the day. Hard to believe that Jack Steele is a name that's being floated around as a potential trade target. If I was St Kilda, I would be locking him up and throwing away the key and making sure someone else isn't poaching your captain, a captain that is a very inspiring type of player. I feel in a midfield group like Melbourne, like Richmond, like teams that don't really have that kind of air about them in the midfield could really use someone like him, but St Kilda shouldn't be looking at coughing him up, and if they're going to cough him up, it would want to be for something fucking huge. Stiff to miss, looking at it in isolation, I thought Cooper Sharman played a really good game. He was just swallowing everything that came his way. He had 21 disposals, but he plucked 10 goals for 3 goals straight, and he managed the 8 score involvements of the game. And I was watching this with my dad, and my dad is an avid St Kilda supporter. And I keep pointing out that with players like Cooper Sharman, like, Anthony Caminiti all coming through, why would you hang your hat on Max King needing to be that influential player that you need? I don't know, but I definitely feel they should be persisting with kids like this. 3 votes. Best on field. Delayed it enough. Rowan Marshall, I feel he's not getting spoken enough about, and I feel could very well be in contention for All-Australian ruckman this year. 26 disposals at 69% disposal efficiency, 13 contested, 180 metres gained, 30 hit-outs, 8 clearances, 10 marks, 1 goal straight, 5 score involvements, and he managed to lay 3 tackles. Again, one of those players that is down and dirty, wins his own ball, loves to tackle. He loves the bump and grind of the game, and he hits the scoreboard, and when he does, he hits it quite well. And I think him and Jack Steele are going to be battling it out for St Kilda's best and fairest this year. But when you look at the ruckman in isolation, there's probably only 1 or 2 ruckmen maybe ahead of him this year. He's very well in the mix and deservingly should be. Saturday night, the first of 2 games was at the MCG with Melbourne hosting GWS. 2 teams still very much fighting for a top 8 finish and coming off of 2 different sides of the spectrum. Melbourne standing tall in some areas but falling incredibly short in others, while GWS is slowly starting to rebuild that momentum that the Orange Tsunami was running with at the start of the year. And at the end of the day, that tsunami was too hard to quell, with GWS walking away with a 2-point victory over Melbourne. And this game created a lot of discussion point for myself off of the field, and I'm bitterly fucking disappointed that it hasn't been talking point for the media to address this week, because a couple of weeks ago when it was Richmond GWS at the MCG, Richmond managed a little over 19,000 in attendance for the game, and us Richmond fans were called fair weather. The club was dragged through the mud. Any excuses any Richmond supporters tried to give for not going to the game was laughed at. This is 2 teams here competing for a finals appearance, and they managed 16,000 in a Saturday night primetime slot. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but very little media coverage has dropped this week talking about the lack of attendance from Melbourne, and I'm sick of there being just one-way streets and a certain agenda being ran by the AFL. It is fucking ridiculous. GWS very compelling and convincing on the day after a hot start to Melbourne. Should have probably had the game done and dusted at quarter time, leading GWS 5-5 to 1-2 at the quarter break. At halftime, GWS managing to stem it all the way back, with Melbourne 6-7 leading GWS 6-4, the way of 3 points. 3-quarter time, it was still very much in the balance. It was only 3 points difference, with 8-9-57 from Melbourne playing 9-6-60. And it was that final term that saw Melbourne go on to kick 4-2 for the rest of the game against GWS's 4-1. Very compelling and impressive showing all the way to the end, even with 29 minutes gone in the final term, Alex Neil-Bullen finding a way to score a goal to keep him in touch, but it just wasn't good enough. Melbourne's inaccuracy kind of weighing factor a little bit here. Yeah, I don't know, because they've got Max Gawn back in, so you can't make the excuse of them missing players. I mean, there's been a definite drop-off with Melbourne since Christian Petrarca has been out of the team due to injury. Christian Salem has been a good backup in the midfield for them, but he was out with concussion this week, so I don't know whether too much fell on the shoulders of like a Clayton Oliver maybe. But outside of that, no injuries to report. No suspensions that I'm fully aware of. There were a couple of howlers in this game. There was one instance, for example, especially, and I think it speaks volumes about Jesse Hogan as a player overall. It was a very bad look. I can't remember if it was Harvey Thomas. I think it was. Running into an open goal, Jesse Hogan absolutely screaming for the handball. Obviously, Thomas doesn't get much opportunity, so he's going to take it when the time comes. Goes to kick a goal. Hogan got in the way and blocked it. It comes off of the leg and ends up spilling out of bounds. Heartbreaking for one kid. But to see the carry-on that went all about it was just... It was so hard to bear. I know you're chasing down a Brownlow medal, not a Brownlow, rather, a Coleman medal. That's the medal you're chasing. I know you're chasing a Coleman medal, Hogan, but don't do it at the expense of a teammate. You know, it's hard to watch a senior player go off at a young kid because you didn't get hand past the ball. You got to be better than that shit, surely. There were compelling performances on both sides of this game, don't get me wrong. Melbourne and GWS had players stand tall, but the 3-2-1 for this game all landed with GWS players, and the one vote landed on a kid who I feel is going to be something special for GWS, and that is James Peatling, who has found himself at many times the starting sub. In this game particularly, he had 28 disposals at 71% disposal efficiency. 18 of those were contested for 355 metres gained. He had 8 clearances, took 5 marks, 3 score involvements, but a game-high 11 tackles. In a game that falls the way of 2 points, you have to pride yourself on defensive pressure around the contest, and Peatling was oozing that defensive pressure. The 2 vote, I'm throwing it at Toby Green. Again, a player who one week can stand tall, another week can go missing, but this week was definitely a game where he was up and about. 16 disposals at 75% disposal efficiency, 8 of those contested for 303 metres gained, one clearance rather, sorry, I was looking at the wrong kind of column there on my list. 1 clearance, he had 6 marks for the game, kicked 3 goals too, 9 score involvements, and 4 tackles. I think 9 overall was the most score involvements of the game, equal with another GWS player. Yeah, equal with Kieran Briggs in the ruck. So Toby Green, again, this season has been built upon not only him hitting the scoreboard, but him getting his teammates involved, and this game was no different. But best on for me, after some very quiet weeks, he has finally recaptured a bit of form, and that is Tom Green. He had 33 disposals for 63% disposal efficiency. 16 of those 33 were contested, with 413 metres gained, if you don't mind. He had 9 clearances, 5 marks, kicked 1 goal, had 5 score involvements, might have only laid the 1 tackle, but his ability to start winning, clearance ball around the contest has been really helping GWS over recent weeks find that form and run with that momentum. It's just a shame that he had a purple patch during the year, because the start he had and the momentum he is currently running with, if he had had that consistently, maybe he would be probably in the mix for the Brownlow this year. But unfortunately, the disparity this year between his best and his worst has been too glaring an issue. The other game to round out Saturday night was the Western Derby, which saw Fremantle take on West Coast in a game that saw a substitution made early and a Brownlow medalist rubbed out for a very line ball incident. And to no surprise, Fremantle walk away with a solid win after a contest that not only did Fremantle not lead at quarter time, but trailed at halftime as well. And then again, it was one of those games that all the momentum shifted the way of Fremantle after that kind of first half, which we've seen kind of historically with these younger teams that are rebuilding. We've seen it with North over recent years. We've seen it with West Coast. We've seen it this year with Richmond. Teams that have young kids playing and getting exposure to the game are going to drop off in second halves of football. That's very much what happened here. Fremantle in the second half going on from 7-3 to 17-8. 10 goals 5 for the second half, playing the 2-5 that West Coast managed for the rest of the game. Was absolutely unreal. This was a contest as well that has a lot of conjecture coming out about Harley Reid, and social media lit up like a fucking Christmas tree about how petulant a child Harvey, I called him Harvey, shit, that Harley Reid is. I was still thinking of Harvey Thomas from the last game, that's why I said Harvey. But they've been coming out saying that, you know, Harley Reid is a petulant child, he needs to grow the fuck up. You know, he's picking fights and he can't take the ramifications that come with that. It's very interesting because I feel as a player that is so heavily involved in the media in the way of always being spoken about, you're eventually going to start developing an ego. And I think that's very much where Harley Reid's on-field ego comes from. You know, whether he's trying to stand up for his teammates or whatnot, there's still instances where he's running from off the ball from a mile away just to get involved in a bit of a scrap. And, you know, arguably some flopping on the weekend as well to kind of draw free kicks. So he's happy to take it. He was happy to dish it, not take it, rather. It's very interesting because he's definitely a talent, but I think he's above some of the shit he's been doing. That's just my personal take. As I said, Zane True subbed out with a shoulder, I think it was, which saw a substitution rather early in this game. Nathan Fife being the player that has been rubbed out at the MRO. They tried to reverse it. It was failed, so he'll have 2 weeks off now instead of 1. Absolutely line ball, very similar to the Isaac Heaney incident, the only difference being Fife was looking at the player when he did it, so that's probably his downfall. But as I said, if precedence has been set, he probably suffers. The 3-2-1 for this game, I personally felt was quite compelling and was easy to determine. You could have raffled a few names. I mean, Tim Kelly had a good game, 32 disposals, 6 score involvements, 6 tackles. Harley Reid had 29 disposals with 10 clearances and 6 score involvements, but only ran at 58%. Elliot Yeo had a good game. Jordan Clark had a good game for Freo, but I landed on Hayden Young for the 1 vote. 20 disposals at 60% disposal efficiency. 10 of those were contested for 231 metres gained. He had 8 clearances, didn't manage to score himself, but he still had 7 score involvements and laid a game-high 12 tackles for the game. For the 2 vote, I gave it to Andrew Brayshaw. 36 disposals at 69%, 25 of those were effective, 10 of those were contested for 532 metres gained, 5 clearances, 2 marks, 1 goal, 14 score involvements and 7 tackles. But to me, and a man that I predicted to be best on for the medal before the game started, was Caleb Sarong. 32 disposals at 65% disposal efficiency, 15 of those were contested for 525 metres gained. Huge game. 10 clearances, 2 marks, 1 goal, 12 score involvements and 2 tackles, and he managed to notch up the best on-ground medallion. Conversation today was on social media about whether Caleb Sarong is a smoky for the Brownlow. I don't think he's a smoky. I think he's a genuine chance. So much so that when you look at the MVP award tally at the end of this video, I have him ahead of Bontempelli and Cripps in the votes this year. So I think he's very well in contention, minus the fact that players like Brayshaw and Young are probably going to poll votes off him. This was definitely a 3 out of, you know, I was going to say 3 out of 3 as a marker then, and I had to stop myself. It was a 10 out of 10 game for me for Caleb Sarong. He was huge. The lack of talk about this kid, I think, is rather concerning. Given that we talk about how good Cripps is, how good Bontempelli is, need to be having conversation about this kid. The first of 3 games on Sunday was at the MCG with Collingwood hosting Richmond in a game that looked like at one point Collingwood was going to win by 60 plus points. So I'll happily take a 26-point defeat at the end of the day, any day of the week. Some moments again through this game that Richmond can really hang their hats on, and minus complete fucking imbeciles like Kane Corn saying there's nothing for Richmond and North Melbourne to be celebrating about. Take the small wins every time they come, if they come. They might be few and far between. They might be very marginable, but if there are wins to take out of a game, definitely take it. This was a game that Collingwood started to get a run on after half time, and, Richmond had Tim Taranto effectively subbed out at half time. So losing Taranto around that contest really opened up opportunity for Collingwood to get on top and just run away with it, and that's exactly what they started doing, and they were too hard to stop. They were showing that their best is still some of the best, and try to argue against me that this kind of rebound that we've seen Collingwood kind of undertake is getting back to their best again. I mean, in the first quarter alone, Darcy Moore had 7 intercept possessions in this one game. The month prior, he had 7 in that entire month. So Richmond, if anything, are starting to play some teams and some players back into form, which is incredibly fucking scary. And the tail of the tape, it was quite convincing. We got smashed pretty much everywhere, minus the fact that we had some more uncontested possession, but we were beaten convincingly in contested ball. We were beaten by clearances quite convincingly as well. We won the free kick count. The big news coming out of Tigerland this week is obviously David Teague and Richmond have parted ways, which I believe Teague wanted to be more offensively sound and prominent with our offensive structure, and Uze didn't want that happening. So, kind of creative differences clashed, and they were happy to see Teague leave. I wish Teague all the best. I definitely did feel heading into this offseason, though, that Richmond have to do a clean out of anything that is still reminiscent of Damien Hardwick's era, and David Teague unfortunately fell under that bracket. There wasn't, as I said, when you look at Richmond's performances this year, minus the scoreboard, you always look for the small little things, and there were a handful of players for Richmond that really stood tall in this game, albeit probably, defensive players like Nick Vlauston, Daniel Rioli, Jaden Short, Nathan Broad, all defensive players, but Vlauston takes 12 defensive marks, Nathan Broad takes 15. These two players were on their game. This could have been a game that leaked so many goals if it wasn't for players like these two being defensive walls, and I shudder to think about how our defensive structure is going to look without those players in it. Kind of prolonged looking down the line. Players like Shea Bolton still performing, except, didn't have the best disposal efficiency, but we've come to accept that with Shea Bolton at this point, haven't we? Liam Baker was solid enough. Jacob Hopper was solid enough. Camden McIntosh played a good game. Dion Prestia played a good game. But when it came to the 3-2-1 for this game, I couldn't look past this player for the one vote. And looking at Richmond's team, I gave it to Nathan Broad. And I've been very bullish on Nathan Broad this year, because Broadie's had one of those years that I feel has been very kind of, it's hard to explain. I use the term shadow of their former self quite a lot on this podcast series. And Nathan Broad's 2024 has been nothing comparatively to what we've seen him do over our premiership years. And this has been probably the best game I've seen him play in 3 years of football, which just speaks volumes about the drop-off he has had. But he had 27 disposals at 92% disposal efficiency. 8 of those were contested for 244 metres gained. He had 1 clearance, took 15 marks, thank you very much, 4 score involvements and 2 tackles. And again, defensively, you've got to give a shout out to Nick Vlauston, who was probably in the conversation for the one vote as well. 23 disposals at 87% and had 12 marks with 5 score involvements of his own. But the 2 vote and the 3 vote go to the Dacos brothers, the first of which gets the 2, and that is Josh Dacos. 32 disposals at 81% disposal efficiency, 6 contested for 798 metres gained, 3 clearances, 6 marks, 1 behind, 7 score involvements and 2 tackles. However, Nick Dacos falling 1 disposal short of his personal best, and at quarter time with about 17 or 18 disposals up until that point, all the commentary teams I was listening to over the radio, on the TV, were all saying he was in for a 50-plus disposal game and put the moz on him. But of those 42, he ran at 69% disposal efficiency, and he had 18 of those contested for 613 metres gained. He also managed to pick up 11 clearances, 6 marks, 12 score involvements, and 5 tackles. When this kid is on, Collingwood are a completely different breed. And it's hard to acknowledge the fact that a player that's, in his 3rd year, is carrying this team so incredibly well on his own 2 shoulders. It's, this kid is something else. He really is. He was just in everything. I mean, they go on, they have 23 score involvements. Out of those 23, he has 12 of those score involvements of his own out of the 23 scores. It's really impressive to see what this kid gets done each and every week. And I definitely feel he is edging closer to the Brownlow this year than Patrick Cripps. I don't know. Am I being too hard on Patrick Cripps at the start of the year? Because I definitely feel Nick Dacos is giving it a red hot fucking shake. Sunday afternoon, SCG, one of the upsets of the round, easily one of the upsets of the year, not only because of the margin, but how it played out. Because up until this point in time, Sydney collectively have only lost by 9 points this entire season. They lost this game by 39 to the Bulldogs in a game that Sydney were never in at all. At quarter time, they trailed by 34 points. At half time, they trailed by 36 points. At 3/4 time, they trailed by 30, 40 odd points. And then at the end of the game, they lose by 39 in a game where up until half time, Sydney only managed 2 goals, 1. For the rest of the game, they managed 5 goals, 5. This is a team that many have argued have one hand on the Premiership Cup already, and their drop-off as well over the last month has been very monumental. That is why I currently have Brisbane as my top seed team of the competition. That doesn't take Sydney out of the equation at all, but it puts the Bulldogs well into contention here. And I can't say let's move Sydney into the pretenders column, because I definitely still they are a contender. They were due a big loss, and they were due a loss of this size because of all the small losses they've had. And I feel a big loss like this at this point of the year is where some teams can make some really drastic turning points in their form, and I think this is one Sydney needs. Lewis Melican went down for Sydney with a right hamstring. They said it was hamstring awareness. Lewis Melican, I feel, is a very underrated defender for Sydney, and I would hate to see him go down a few weeks before finals, because he's been monumental for Sydney this year. The Bulldogs, on the other hand, again, this was a game where in the past you'd expect players like Liberatore and Bontempelli to be on top of their game, but again, this is a game where neither of those names are going to be mentioned for votes, and you turn your attention elsewhere around the ground, and you start noticing that players might not be racking up big numbers, but their disposal efficiencies may be down, but the impact they're still able to have on the game is rather huge, which leads me to, again, giving a 1 vote to Jamara Ugle-Hagan. Now, his ball use is absolutely atrocious because he ran at 46% from his 13 disposals. Right. He had 6 contested, 231 metres gained. Not many metres gained, but you got to remember, he's playing predominantly in the forward 50 for the Bulldogs. Where he won me over is he's taken 4 marks, he's kicked 4 goals, 4, he's laid 4 tackles, and he's had 7 score involvements. In a game where 7 score involvements actually makes you the 3rd highest ranked player on the ground off of that stat alone, he was big, he was huge. He took opportunity of the very little opportunity he was given in a team that was incredibly dominant. I thought he had a really good game. For the 2 votes this week, it went to a very unlikely suspect, because when we have spoken about Sydney's performances this year, it's always been Goulden, Heaney, Warner, even Nick Blakey to a certain extent. But this goes to Matt Roberts, who I thought played the game of his life. 36 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency, 10 contested for 895 metres gained. Holy fuck. 1 clearance, 8 marks, 1 goal, 3 score involvements, 3 tackles. As comprehensive a game that you will see a player of his role type playing. He's a medium to small type defender, but he was just in everything in this game, and it was definitely, to me, a career-defining moment because he identified what his best looks like, and I definitely think Sydney have a steal with this kid. But best on, for me, is a player that I have said for many weeks on this podcast series has had an incredibly underrated season, and this just keeps adding on to that list. Adam Treloar, 40 disposals at 72% disposal efficiency, 19 contested for 328 metres gained, 3 clearances, 4 marks, 7 score involvements, and 3 tackles. What more does this bloke have to do to be considered for the All-Australian? Because I've seen many teams are floating that don't have him in it. Many teams of the weeks that are leaving him omitted as well. I definitely feel he should be in the conversation. If he is not in the 40-man squad as a neutral supporter, I would be pissed. Also, do let me know in the comment section down below, even though Sydney lost this game, they are still on top of the ladder. Do you think they will finish on top of the ladder to round out the season? And do you think they are still the premiership favourite with 4 rounds of football to go? The final game of the round saw Adelaide Oval turn into a fucking slaughterhouse in a game where both teams had 5 goals registered each at quarter time. Adelaide going on to kick 3 goals for the rest of the game after that in 3 quarters of football, with Hawthorn coming back out and managing to kick 14 goals 10. This could have been a lot more uglier if Hawthorn had been accurate. And this goes back to just show the disparity between where Adelaide's at and where Hawthorn are at, and Adelaide being a team that was lauded as being a top 4, top 5, top 6 team and underperforming to the fact that they're going to finish bottom 4, and Hawthorn, who are looking to play finals and very well will make it, and were probably teased as being a bottom 4 team. So split right down the middle and flipped on its head. Adelaide expected to be up the top, Hawthorn expected to be down the bottom. Let's flip it to reality, folks, because it's completely not the way we saw things coming. And a couple of those late goals, and they came really late in the 28th and the 30th minutes, were junk goals that really helped that scoreline. Otherwise, they were looking down the barrel of 70, 80 points plus. I don't think there was anything to report out of this game. I think we might be clear. No. CJ went down with a shoulder injury for Hawthorn. Giath taken to go have some assessments done. If he misses the rest of the year, so be it. I don't think he does. It looks pretty innocuous to me. I think he should be right maybe after a week off. I'm not entirely sure. But Hawthorn looking so good. And Taylor Walker has come out this week saying that he sees a lot of the 2017 Richmond in Hawthorn. I agree with that fact. I see a lot of GWS in Hawthorn as well. To the fact of Hawthorn is just comprised of many small to medium forwards that are absolutely speedy, and all they have to do is get control of the ball, bang it forward, and let the Mosquito fleet go through and do their thing, because that's exactly what they're fucking doing right now. I don't know who's going to be the next team to stop them. You know, after the start they had to the year, everyone writ them off, and they've won the most games of the competition since that point in time. It still blows my mind and flabbergasts me to think that we're having a conversation right now about Hawthorn still being in the hunt for finals. Absolutely insane. For the best on for this game, look, there were a few that you could have raffled off again quite easily, but given the fact that Hawthorn win this one by 68 points, I did fall all of these votes to Hawthorn players. But special mentions definitely on the day go to Rory Laird, 29 disposals at 69% disposal efficiency, 18 contested for 385 metres gained, 7 clearances, 3 marks, 5 score involvements, 8 tackles. Lockie Scholl, 29 disposals for 65%. He had 5 score involvements, 6 tackles. Jake Saligo, 30 disposals at 66%, 19 contested, 11 clearances, 6 involvements, and 4 tackles. However, for me, the 3-2-1 read as follows. The 1 vote went to Will Day. 20 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency, 12 contested for 461 metres gained, 3 clearances, 1 mark, 1 goal, 4 score involvements, and 7 tackles. The 2 vote I am giving to Jai Newcomb, who had 22 at 81% disposal efficiency, 9 contested for 306 metres gained, 6 clearances, 5 marks, 2 goals straight, 7 score involvements, and 3 tackles. And best on was Connor McDonald, 28 disposals at 71%, 9 contested for 366 metres gained, 2 clearances, 4 marks, 2 goals, and 1 behind, rather. 14 score involvements and 4 tackles. I slowed down a little bit there because I was losing my track, but as comprehensive a game as I've seen Connor McDonald play for Hawthorn. Oh, hang on. The 3 vote for me this week was quite easy to give out because as far as the Hawthorn players went, I thought he was the best quite comfortably and was probably the best game I've seen him play for Hawthorn. And that was young Connor McDonald. 28 disposals at 71%, 9 contested for 366 metres gained, 2 clearances, 4 marks, 2 goals, 1, 14 score involvements, and 4 tackles. This was a team that for a very long time I said wouldn't play finals probably for the next couple of years, but once they collectively got their chemistry going, they were going to start flying. They're doing that right now, and that's scary because they've still got a lot of kids coming through their system that is still incredibly young and yet to hit their stride and hit their peak. Once that happens, holy fuck, Hawthorn could slowly be turning back into a juggernaut again, and we should all be fucking terrified of that fact. So after 20 rounds of football, this is how our ladder shapes up, and as you're about to see, it is still open season for a handful of teams. In first place, we have Sydney on 56 points. A win and a half behind them in equal second is Brisbane and Fremantle, and a win behind them, sitting in equal fourth, we have Carlton, GWS, Geelong and Port Adelaide, all split on percentage. Western Bulldogs currently sit in 8th spot with their name changed to Footscray for the retro round coming up, and tied with them on points, just missing out on percentage, is Hawthorn sitting in 9th. Essendon sit in 10th, a win out of the top 8, with Melbourne and Collingwood both sitting on 40 points respectively, also a win behind 8th place. After that, and I think now out of contention, is the Gold Coast on 36, with St Kilda trailing them on 32, and our bottom 4 as Adelaide, West Coast, North Melbourne and Richmond respectively. And with the round officially recapped, there is only one thing for us to do, and that is to turn our attention to the leaderboard for the Hip and Shoulders MVP award for the 2024 season. As I have done in this video, I have done in every video of this series. Every single game has been given a 3-2-1 voting system, and this is how our top 10 currently sits after 20 rounds of football. Again, this is an objective list, and I still feel I was harsh on Patrick Cripps at the beginning of the season. Should be up a little bit higher, so if any blue baggers are watching, I apologise. And once again, before I dive in, perfect discussion point with myself and yourself in the comments down below. Let me know how you feel about my top 10 with 4 rounds to go, and if you think I might be onto something when it comes to the Brownlow. Do you think these players are going to be in contention? Do you think I've got it wrong? Let's talk about it once this video is over. But currently, this is how we shape up. In 10th place on 18 votes, we have Tom Green. In 9th place on 19 votes, we have Jack Steele. In 8th place on 20 votes, we have Errol Goulden. In 7th place on 21 votes, we have Marcus Bontempelli. And in 6th place, equal with 23 votes, we have Adam Treloar and Patrick Cripps. Our top 5 sees Lachie Neale in 5th place on 27 votes. In 4th place, we have Nick Dacos on 28 votes. In 3rd place, we have Caleb Sarong on 29 votes. In 2nd place, we have Zach Merritt on 30 votes. And in 1st place, hasn't polled a vote in a very long time, but holding on to the lead purely because of his hot start, we have Isaac Heaney on 31 votes. There are 4 votes separating my top 5. There are 8 votes separating 6th place and 1st place. It is anybody's game with 4 rounds to go. I still feel deep down, as I said earlier in this video, I feel a tie coming on for this Brownlow, and something involving Lachie Neale really has me kind of centered around that fact. Whenever Brisbane has performed well in a season, Lachie Neale gets looked after by the umpires and with the votes. It's proven with the way he's won 2 Brownlows already. Could he be up for his 3rd? Let's talk about it. But that is it for another video. Thank you for bearing with me. I've felt a little bit under the weather this week. I feel a little bit run down. So if at times at all through this video I've looked tired or dead, or it looks like I'm ready to fall asleep, there's a good chance I might have even fallen asleep in this fucking video. Who knows? I am really enjoying putting these videos together, and moving forward onto next year, I'm already looking at bigger and better things. I will be uploading this not only as a video podcast, but next year I will be doing it as an audio podcast on Spotify as well. And each and every week, I'm going to be looking at bringing in some special guests in the way of friends and members of the community we are building to give their opinions and takes from their own kind of team perspective. You know, I've already got people in mind that are Collingwood supporters, Brisbane supporters, Essendon, St Kilda, North Melbourne. You know, it'd be good to get a perspective from players and supporters kind of around the traps. If I can get players involved and maybe interview a player or 2 through the year, that'd be fantastic as well. So planning wise, already looking ahead. Mock draft definitely going to be coming, and I'll be getting on top of that soon. Trade period and draft period coverage 100% happening. Breakdowns of teams' performances at the end of the year and what they need to do to improve and get better for the 2025 season coming. I will do my own All-Australian team come the end of the year. I'll be ranking players in some tier lists and stuff as well. I've been seeing some of those going around on TikTok, and I reckon we could have some fun with that here on this platform. And as always, if you guys have any ideas for content you would like to see on this channel, let me know in the comment section down below. I am open to any and all suggestions. But thank you for taking the time to join me today. Hit that like button down below if you do enjoy what I do. Hit that subscribe button to get on board the community we are building. We are edging closer every day to our first 100 subscribers, and I feel after we break that barrier, the floodgates will open. Let's do something big and bad with this channel. I'm feeling it. Let's dive on in. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.